Hey everybody, welcome back to my YouTube channel, AskAVC, where I cover all different sorts of topics, SaaS, startups, venture related. And I'm here again with my friend and colleague, Anshu Sharma, who's had experiences working at companies as big as Salesforce and Oracle, spent some time working with me at Storm, and now has gone on to start 3 companies, one of which now he's CEO of, called Skyflow. And one of the things we really wanted to talk about is some of the challenges and mistakes and things that he and I both have seen over the years that founders and first-time CEOs often make that might be able to help you avoid some of them in your own journey. So Anshu, being a first-time CEO and founder, it is so hard because there's so many things that none of us really can train for. I think sometimes venture investors love to dispense advice and say, do this, do that, but there's really, that's no substitute and doesn't make a lot of sense sometimes in the context of being a first-time CEO and founder. When you think about and looking back both in your investing career or maybe your experiences at Salesforce where you had a first-time CEO and now being a first-time CEO, what are some of the things that immediately bubble to the surface that you think about that have just been challenging that would be good to talk about?
Yeah, so I think first of all, you have to sort of let yourself make mistakes. I think a lot of books you read about a lot of famous founders and CEOs are sort of written, with the history cleaned up.
Yes, it's a hero story, it's survivorship bias, yes.
And I've worked with some people who now run $5, $10, $20 billion market cap companies and had opportunity to work with Mark. And you see all the flaws they have and their genius. And it turns out everybody has flaws, so get over it. As CEO, you'll make a lot of mistakes and you have a lot of flaws. What you have to come to terms with is what do you need to build around yourself in order to succeed? Do you need, are you, ADD genius type of person who needs a lot of structure around them? So go find people who complement you. Or are you maniacally focused on execution and you need a designer who's going to make your company pop. So know thyself in some ways is a good
I think you're right.
Good edict for any partnership, be it your marriage relationship,
sure, right,
a venture capital firm, or starting a company. If you don't know who you are, you can't find
you don't know
who
how
you
to
can work
compensate.
with.
Yeah, you don't know how to compensate.
Yeah.
And it probably goes to selecting your co-founder, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, biggest mistake, as you know, is co-founders, and a lot of co-founder relationships don't work out. I saw at Salesforce, Parker Harris and Mark probably have now the most successful co-founder relationship probably in Silicon Valley. I'm sure there were others before that, but they've truly sustained over a period of time. They've worked together for now over 20 years. There has been a cadre of execs that have come and gone, and what's really sustained that relationship, which is special, is mutual trust. And I think in the beginning you try to emphasize skill sets and such, but over time what you're really trying to optimize for is trust.
Yes. I'm so glad you brought that up. Trust and transparency can be so challenging, I think, as a first-time CEO and founder to bring that forward into the organization. And it's not because, people are inherently like liars or there's bad things happening, but the reality is, trusting and being transparent involves sometimes dealing with difficult things and talking about them and bringing them out. And there's, to your point about being self-aware and knowing, what you're good at and what you're not. What I see oftentimes is that many founders don't have the skill sets around confrontation and dealing with these difficult issues. I did a video on delivering bad news, and that's something I just see, it's really hard for a lot of people because, they've never been in a position where they've had to be leading an organization and actually delivering bad news. And then what happens often is they rationalize it. They kind of lie to themselves about the problem, which maybe makes them feel better, but is terrible for the rest of the organization. And so, I think you're right. If you're like a friend in this particular case, if you're a founder and maybe you have a difficult time dealing with confrontation, you really ought to get a co-founder who's comfortable. It's not a jerk, but is comfortable being direct and talking about those difficult things, because that's going to create huge issues internally.
Yeah, compounding your personality bias with hiring more people who are just like you, in the end, basically means you have an entire organization that's compounded the same traits.
Right.
I think one of the things that people forget is just because there is now a 3-letter acronym after your name, CEO, CTO, whatever it is, doesn't really change who you are, your personality. And so sometimes people think because there's a CEO, they have to know all the answers. Not knowing all the answers and being okay with it, and yet being able to make decisions. So being able to make decisions, knowing that some of your decisions are going to be wrong, is really, really stressful and really, really hard. And for me, what I fall back upon is kind of in my head, I have mental models of people like Mark and others, like what would they do? And I know there's a set of errors you can make that are correctable. There are a set of errors you can make that are really, really hard to fix. And so if you're making the correctable errors, you keep going forward. So I think
on the subject of transparency, I think a lot of founders understandably struggle with what they want to share with their investors, and not only with investors but also just with the broader team. How do you think about that here, having started three companies?
Yeah, so I think there is sort of a culture. Some accelerators that I won't name, that created this perception that you can lie your way to success. And I think there's an element and grain of truth in there, which is there are things that, for example, you have a customer that pays you $1,000 a year, and in order to get on the front page of TechCrunch, you say, I just signed up, General Electric as a customer. And there's an impression being created as if they just signed a $1 million deal.
Yeah.
So, but that's marketing.
Right.
And one of the things internally we used to say at Salesforce is like, you do marketing to external people, not to internal people. So you can't market BS to yourself and say, oh, now we have 5 Fortune 500 companies, we have product market fit.
Right.
So knowing what is marketing, what is BS, and what could truly hurt you is really, really important. And in some ways, if you think about what is a startup, if you just think about the word startup, what is a startup? To me, startup is purely an intellectual exercise to find a truth that other people haven't found. So for example, you may have an idea that maybe all computing should be in the cloud. That's an assumption, and you're trying to test that truth out. So if you're trying to test a truth out by building an early version of the product, hiring an early team, it really, really hurts yourself to not know the truth.
Right.
Because if you live in denial about the ground realities and you assume that the world, so for example, you may have started a company in 2002, and because you wanted to BS your way, you could have said, single tenant SaaS is the future. And yes, you got a few customers and maybe you lied to a few investors, but in the end, you basically ruined your own business. So really understanding that, to me, in some ways, a startup is basically an experiment in finding the truth that other people haven't found.
Yeah, and
can sort of ground you.
Yeah, and I think with that, it's clear you got to accept there's a lot of mistakes that you're going to make. I mean, that's the reality of running a business and managing a team and thinking about what's correctable, what's not, and really trying to be cognizant of that. I mean, when it comes to venture investors, right, and dealing with, they're somewhat external, right? To you're talking about marketing externally and internally. Yeah. I always like to think of myself as internal when I'm working with teams, but I do understand that I'm not internal, right? I'm an investor. I'm on the board. It's not the same as being on the team, and I recognize that creates some stress in the potentially in the relationship.
So I think this is one of the reasons picking your early stage investors is as important as picking your, not maybe the first co-founder, but almost your second co-founder or founding team, because I think a lot of investors either don't have the personality or the mindset, or sometimes they're perfect investors. You've seen their photos on the cover of Wall Street Journal, but they are prepared for a different stage of the firm.
Yeah.
So someone who traditionally invests in Series C and Series D is going to focus on growth. They are not going to understand when you come back and you say, our initial assumption about this aspect of the business is wrong.
Right.
Let's go again. Their answer is going to be, go hire a better VP of sales.
Or
hire a new board member.
Or a new CEO.
Or a new CEO.
Right.
They are not in the... So think about say a chemistry lab versus a chemicals factory. Early stage investing and early stage creation of companies is kind of like working in the lab. You're trying to test formulas and move things around, and you really don't know what's going on, and you're looking in the petri dish to see if something is growing. Versus producing medicines at scale in remote locations in large factories is an entirely different job. It's all pharma, but this is about finding things that nobody's found yet, and this business is different. So if you hire, CEO or board member of Teva or Novartis to come help you figure out how to figure out whether this bacteria is going to be, curable or not, they are the wrong people.
Right.
They don't really have the mindset skills. Frankly, I've seen people from the wrong stage of the company invest and then just go bored.
Right.
The board member becomes a board member because they can't quite empathize. They have no interest in that scale.
Yep.
Your $17,000 deal that's having difficulty for them is just like, they just came back from a board meeting where they closed a $17 million deal.
Right. Yeah. They're thinking about lunch. They're not thinking about what you got to do in your business. Well, and I think too, getting back to your point just about, mistakes and accepting that, I think you need venture investors that accept that too, right? That understand that that's the way. So when I walk into, board meetings and I have conversations with CEOs, I'm never expecting things are going to be perfect and they're going to give me all good news. I mean, that'd be crazy. In fact, I would say, the majority of my conversations involve bad news. Why? Well, because those are the things that you need to correct, that you're working on, that need help, right? We'd all like to sit around and talk about how great we're doing, but it's not necessarily what's actionable in the business.
I mean, in some ways, we're raising our early funding round, and we're talking to some early customers. And what I found common between both of them is I on purpose try not to tell the whole story in a very polished manner. And the reason is because I want the customer to fill in the blanks, right? So if I say, imagine if there was a new kind of data fabric that could not be hacked, ...
Right.
What the customer says is as important as what I'm pitching them. And I found that to be also true with investors. I know when you're trying to raise money, you kind of become at some point really, really focused on convincing everybody. But in some ways, in the early stage process, if I have to convince you too hard, then the second board meeting is going to be really painful for both of us.
Right. No, they're great points. Well, maybe to transition, one of the other, things I think that's just so hard for first-time founders, first-time CEOs, execs in general is hiring. Hiring is so hard because often you're hiring for a skill set that's very different than your own. I mean, just to take like a stereotypical example of, an engineering founder, who is very technical, when she goes to hire her VP of sales, she may not have any experience in terms of what to look for in that VP of sales. And sales leaders often are very good communicators, often for obvious reasons, and it can be very difficult to assess, well, is this the right person or not, and why? So, I see this happen over and over again. And so one of the things that I try to encourage people to do, again, in the interest of being transparent, is to really solicit other advice and get perspectives from other people that have a better understanding of skills than you do. And maybe as the CEO founder, you spend a lot of time testing for values and culture and those sorts of fits, especially if you don't have the depth of experience on the skill set. What are, in your experience, you've hired a lot, every role you've hired. How do you sort of think about that, hiring into roles that you maybe, you're not an expert in?
Yeah, so I think I've been somewhat lucky. I had played few different hats in my career, engineering, product strategy, biz dev, but not really carried quota for a salesperson. But I did get to interact with the world's best salespeople. And so I think the most important thing is someone in the hiring process it could be you as a CEO, or it could be one of your advisors, needs to have a mental model of what good looks like.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's no different than when you're building a mobile app. If you don't know what makes Airbnb or Uber's app feel good and feel bad, then you're going to have a very hard time hiring a designer to build that mobile app for you.
Right.
And the biggest mistakes I see people making is they don't have an internal model because they may not have worked at great companies that have done that. So one pattern in my investing experience I've noticed is amongst companies I've invested in and founders I worked with, teams that have come out of successful companies, even the most technical engineer founder has some mental model of what a great VP of marketing or great VP of sales looks like, or they know someone who knows that person.
Right.
Whereas a lot of people who may have even started a couple of companies and worked in different cultures, but have never seen what success looks like, it's very hard for them to figure out what that means and model it. So, one way to fill that gap is to read a lot and learn a lot. But a second way is, I'm not a big fan of having a bunch of advisors floating around your company. But when you find something as specific as that, I'm a first-time founder, maybe I'm 30 years old, I've never really worked at a company that's gone to $1 billion in ARR or even $100 million in ARR. Finding one or two people, this could be a board member who's done it before. Sometimes you're not lucky enough to have picked the right board member. Find one or two people. Don't go hire 15 advisors.
Yeah.
Go find that one person and get them meaningfully engaged.
I think you're right, because I think you hire 15 advisors, you're going to get a very kind of diluted view of what, and unfortunately, since advice is free, you often can get a lot of it from a lot of different people that don't necessarily have the opinions and perspective that are going to be value to you in hiring.
So Ray Dalio's book Principles, if you've read that, it basically talks about you don't take advice from anybody. The first question you ask is not whether the advice is good or not. The first question you ask is this person have credible experience to give me this advice?
Right, right.
And I think that's the part that you skip. Oftentimes it's names, logos, earlier success, and you don't really.
Or sometimes, like I see, oftentimes it's not. Not only do you skip all of that, but you'll end up just working with friends because they're known.
Yes.
And you'll say, "Oh, this is a good guy."
Yes.
That's a terrible reason to hire somebody.
Yes.
I mean, maybe it's a good person is a part of the package.
Yeah.
But just because someone knows someone else. So how about related to all this is you hire folks. Inevitably, unfortunately, some of them are not going to work out, right? They're not going to be good fits for the role. The organization's moving fast. They couldn't whatever it is. One of the things I think is it's just so hard, and maybe it relates back to being direct and confrontational, is being able to let people go when it's not a good fit. Not a good fit for the organization. It's not a good fit for them. You're not doing them any favors because they're not going to progress in their career in that role. How do you kind of think about that?
So, luckily or unluckily, I've never had to fire too many people, but I have had to change their roles and move them out and, of course, fire a handful of them. But what I found helpful was once it's clear to you that they're not working out for a role is, very analytical. But the moment you've kind of made the decision, you have to switch into high empathy mode.
Yes.
Which is, it's no longer about you. You've kind of made the decision this person's not going to be able to do this job. And people, what they do is they stay in that mode and they can be awkward and ruthless or just surprise the candidate. You have to then move into the high empathy mode. At some point, you love this person. You hired them, especially in exec.
Right.
And so you have to basically then sit down with them. It may be a series of conversations, right? You don't want it to be like one-time surprise. And you start really then helping analyze with them, what is it going on? Is it situational? Is it lack of skills? Is it something else they would rather be good at? And essentially, the message you're sending is, this is not working. We're going to try and figure out another role for you in the company, or maybe you should go do something else. And as an exec, especially, the other person should be able to receive that message. And part of your test in some ways is if they can't receive that message, that means they can't really work as an exec either.
Right.
So most people will respond well to that. In some cases, I've had people who've quit on the spot because they thought they were going to be promoted to SVP, and I was telling them they weren't even a good VP. and in those cases, again, be respectful, and I've let them walk away. Some of them are actually still close friends and execs at very big companies. And it's a learning process. What you have to know is that you may be wrong. You may have been wrong in hiring that person. You may be wrong in expecting what you expected. You may be wrong even in firing this person. And you have to hold that possibility while still acting on your decision. So you're not saying, I think you're useless and cannot do this job, neither here nor anywhere else. You're saying, this situation is not working out for us.
Right.
And I may be wrong, but as CEO, I have to make that call today.
Yep.
So I'm going to stick with it, but tell me what you need in order to move your life forward. Of course, this is assuming it's about people not working out and ethical issues.
Yeah, and those issues aside. But you're right. I think that put a good point on. It's the difficulty of making that call as a founder CEO with really imperfect information. There is no. It's not absolutes, and you're right. And in the tough situations, it's not super clear cut. Though that it's not working, and I think what a lot of people end up doing is they just sort of want to hope that it's going to get better over time, right? And just believe that maybe if I just do this and that, then this person's gonna.
Or they want to imagine that the person I'm firing is actually completely incompetent. So in order to feel good about their decision, they want to imagine that person is not. They hired thinking this person was a 9. To really fire a person in an exec senior role, you don't have to rank them, 3 on 10. If your interpretation of the work goes down to 6.5, I can't have a 6.5 or a 7 working as a VP in my company.
Right.
So when I'm letting go of a person who's a 7 in that role in my company, they can easily be an 8 in another role in another company, right?
Right. No, it's a great point. I think people naturally want to rationalize their decision, whatever it is. If they want to hold on to someone, they want to make excuses about why that person's able to do their job, and this is the blame. It's the product. It was a bad quarter, whatever it is. But the same is also true. It's a great point. If they have to let someone go, they end up, basically rationalizing that decision and often, concluding that they were incompetent when really it wasn't the case. My favorite example of that often is a VP of sales role. Oftentimes you miss multiple quarters. It's tough to hold on to a VP of sales, but it's almost never the VP of sales' fault solely, right? That you didn't make your quarter. There's often something going on with your way you're marketing the product, or how you're supporting them, or how well the product works, or how you're generating. It's always
another way to say it is, I've never seen a company get fixed by replacing one exec.
Exactly. Yes. So it's a team.
If you're replacing one exec, it can make an incremental improvement in your area. Sometimes over a long period of time, it's the right decision. But if you think overnight changing your CMO is going to quadruple your number of leads, or your VP of sales suddenly is going to do 10 times more revenue, it's rarely that. And maybe there are examples of that, but I've never really seen it. More often than not, what it is, as I said, that person in that situation, that role, in that stage of your company is a 7 or a 7.5. And because you're struggling in that area, or because you have other issues with your product or your marketing, you need a superhero. I think the big mistake is that we want superheroes in all our jobs. But you have to figure out what are the 1 or 2 critical skills that are going to make that person successful in that job, and just optimize for that.
Right.
That's both your hiring strategy and your firing strategy.
Yes, and it's super hard to do. And I think back to where we started, accepting that some mistakes are going to happen. You're not going to hire perfectly every time, and then trying to work through on what you can.
It's also why this is one way to think about diversity too. By the way, one of the reasons people have a hard time hiring diverse background people, it's not just diversity of race and ethnicity and color, it's also diversity of backgrounds. right? We all think if you find that perfect person who has an undergrad from MIT and a Stanford MBA and has worked at VMware for 4 years and then Amazon at 3 years, they are perfect. First of all, there's only 17 people like that in the world, and they're all starting their own companies.
Right.
But the reality is, more likely than not, as a startup, you are in the job of finding awkwardly shaped pieces that don't fit very well inside big companies. If a person is extremely well-rounded and has all the skills, more often than not, they're doing extremely well at a company like Google or Salesforce, and they're not looking to join a startup. I'm talking about early stage companies. What you're looking for is, what is that one or two things that are wrong with this person in some abstract notion? Maybe they don't have the right pedigree, maybe the number of experience is wrong, maybe they took a year off because of family reasons and coming back. It can both inform your diversity-based hiring strategy as well as actually land you exceptional candidates, because these are the people that most other people are going to overlook.
Right. I think it's a great point, talking about, how you really build that kind of diversity into your thought process in terms of hiring, because I think it's, again, challenging for a lot of founders, because I think as human beings, our natural inclination is to hire people that sort of, look like us, think like us, right? Yeah. But that's, finding the best candidates, it's challenging if you do that. And if you limit yourself to looking at it like that, you're inevitably going to build a weaker team long term. And I think what is lost often too on founders is that if you don't start building diversity on day one with the team, it just gets increasingly more difficult over time. Because, if you're a fantastic, engineer of color or a female engineer, you're not really probably psyched to go work at a company that has all 35-year-old white male engineers. I mean, you didn't sign, well, maybe it's intimidating, but also just probably didn't sign up to go work at a fraternity, right? I mean, that's just not where you...
And it's challenging because, early founding teams are typically built on the basis of relationships. So my advice to people is, it's acceptable at 5, it's kind of not acceptable at 10, and it's a really bad idea at 20 employees or 40 employees that you have, and it's hard. It's been challenging for me, and it's been challenging for almost every founder I talk to, not to hire people who are like them.
Well, and I think too, the in the interest of trying to move very quickly, right? Often the pipeline is going to be from their very narrow networks that maybe they know, which again is very logical and makes sense. And they want to move quickly. They don't want to wait another month to go hire that critical person because they feel like they're already a year behind. And then you'll compromise on some of these things.
I mean, in some ways, both investing and hiring is like playing a game of Moneyball, right? So in some ways, your edge comes from finding odd pieces.
Yes.
Odd founders, odd product execs, odd sales execs, because perfectly rounded pieces fit into a Lego machine. They don't really need to go out there and find this pirate ship that they need to go work for.
Right. Great points. Well, super. What a great discussion on challenges. I mean, we could spend, I think, probably a lot more time talking about it. That's probably good for now, though. I appreciate everybody watching this episode on some of the challenges being a founder, first-time CEO. Please, again, hit the like button, subscribe, share with your friends, and leave Anshu and I comments. If there's things that you do want to hear more about or want to engage on, leave us comments, and we'll do our best to get back to you. But thanks again, and look forward to talking with you again next time.
Thank you.